very glad to be presenting Skift Megatrends for the first time in India. And we've already, Megatrends is live, so we had showcased it in New York and in London. And yes, this is the first time that we are bringing it to India, and we hope to, can you hear me? You can hear me. And we hope to make it an annual event. So Megatrends is the longest running and the biggest annual franchise of Skift. So just a disclaimer before anything else, these are not predictions. These are not things that the journalists sit around a crystal ball and then try to gauge what the situation is going to be like. These are research-backed findings, that insights and analysis that we've got after talking to various stakeholders in the travel industry. And we are glad to be doing this in India for the first time, because for the first time, we have India as a megatrend in Skift. So the India megatrend, my colleague Varsha will be explaining to you. Let me just take you through what Megatrends is all about. Is this better? Yeah? Okay. So, Skift Megatrends represents the work that every department in Skift does when we come together. So we start researching for Megatrends as early as 6 months in advance. And it's a combined effort of editorial, research, Skift, Airline Weekly, Daily Lodging Report, and Skift meetings. So this time around, we have 16 megatrends, and we have clubbed these 16 megatrends into 3 themes. The first being redistributed, blended, and polarized world. Now, to a post-COVID audience, I do not need to explain these words. You are fairly aware of what each of these mean. But still, we've clubbed them, and we want to explain. My colleague and I will be trying to encapsulate that. Half an hour is not really the ideal time for it, but I hope that once you see this, you would go back and read the megatrends. So we at Skift believe, while we are very cautiously optimistic about 2023, we believe that 2023 is the ideal time for us for the travel industry to be creative, because A, we believe that the pent-up demand phase is over. The peaks and valleys that you saw when destinations suddenly announced reopening or closed down is something that will not be around for too long or has already been over. I recently spoke to Tony Fernandez of AirAsia, and Tony told me that COVID is officially over for AirAsia. And I guess COVID is officially over for every other destination as well, as Singapore or Malaysia or any other destination would vouch for. Now, the other interesting thing is that what we have realized and what we've been talking a lot about, the great merging that we have talked about in Skift in 2022, is about the fact that how our work, travel, and social life have all been merged together. And that has been able to happen because of the fact that the future of work is changing. The work from anywhere mode that has happened. And at the end of the day, let's be realistic. You can only travel when you have a holiday from work, right? But with the work from anywhere, the system that's come in, you have destinations catering to digital nomads. You have hotels and hospitality units talking about how they are working to attract digital nomads. And of course, what we talked about, the global flow of travelers are also changing. Like we talked about the fact that how India is poised to replace China as an outbound destination, at least when the whole reordering of travel is happening in Asia. So the global flows of travelers, when they change, how do you, as a stakeholder in the industry, cater to that? And then the other big factor is that there is a huge investment as far as travel is concerned. If you look at the amount of money that Saudi is putting in, $1 trillion for the next decade, just on tourism. I mean, like closer home, look at the fact that India is planning, with the government and private entities together, for the next 5 years, they plan to set up, they've kept aside 12 billion for investment in infrastructure of airports. And you know how important airports are. You've seen what has happened with the whole regional connectivity scheme and the UDAN scheme. And last but not the least, we may try to avoid it, we may not talk about it, but AI is coming and it's changing things. And for people like me who are journalists, we are at the risk of losing our jobs, and many others as well, because you never know. If you just type in and AI just brings out an article, a flawlessly written article. But of course, there is a lot of back and forth about it, about the fact that how effective it is and how good it will be. So in the next half an hour, we have tried to unpack Skift Megatrends for you so that you get a flavor of it. But I would strongly suggest that you read each of these 16 megatrends to understand. And of course, the examples that you see will be a very global example, but that's where the industry is headed, right? And if we want to be a global superpower, we need to know what's happening around the world. I'd like to thank our sponsors for Megatrends who have worked with us. And since we're doing this for the first time in India, I would also like you to introduce the Skift brands. So we have 9 brands: Skift, Skift Live, Skift Pro, Skift Research, Airline Weekly, Daily Lodging Report, Skift Meetings, Skift X, and we've recently started a consulting business called Skift Advisory. If anybody wants to talk more about it, I'm available. You can always talk to me about it. And since we are so bullish about India, we are now coming out with a Skift newsletter, absolutely, completely catering to the India market. We've recently launched a Middle East newsletter, which is a weekly. And when we launch the Skift newsletter, we might start it as a weekly, but we plan to make it a daily. So this will be a one-stop shop for everything that's related to travel as far as India is concerned. And we are also planning to come up with a Skift India conference sometime next year. Of course, we'll get the details to you later. And if you want to subscribe to Skift, so we have a special, we are in a very good mood today, so we've got a special 25% off subscription for Skift, so you can take the QR code from there. Now I would request my colleague Varsha to come and explain a little bit on the research side of what Megatrends is all about.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you everyone for being here. We are really excited to be presenting our signature Megatrends for the first time in India. So let's just jump in. We at Skift are very cautiously optimistic about travel in 2023. We believe that we have a number of hard challenges coming ahead. Like, we have to face them this year. They're not behind us, but ahead of us this year, right? So now, why do I say that? It's because there are clouds out there which are causes for concern. So for example, recession, inflation, the ongoing China-US trade war conversations, and of course, the actual war going on in Ukraine these days. So there are all causes of concerns which will impact travel this year in one way or the other. Now, I don't want to start too heavy, but of course, there is some bad news about a risk of global recession coming our way this year. IMF has already forecasted it, and I mean, the entire world is at a huge risk, right? So we need to be very honest about this economic outlook, and we need to be aware of what inflation could mean for travel. It's going to be heavy for us on our pockets. Discretionary spends are going to go down, which will have a direct impact on travel. Now, if you look at the growth outlook, this is what Skift Research has projected. So we have some pretty strong gains in cruise and airline section, while OTAs and accommodation is also expected to grow in 2023 as compared to 2022. And this is what it will look like in dollar figures. Now, I started by saying that there is some bad news about the economy, and then I came up with double-digit growth projections for the travel industry. So I might have confused you a little bit there, but there are reasons why we have a very optimistic outlook for travel. One is that travel is in a very unique position as compared to other industries. It is still under-indexed relative to the broader economy. And the second is reopening of Asia. So when the pent-up demand in US and Europe is going down, Asia is actually picking up in just the nick of time, providing us the boost that is very much necessary for travel globally. So now let me start with the economic part. Now, whenever we talk about these economic storm clouds, what often comes to our mind is all these layoffs, all these headlines, which is grabbing news these days. There are layoffs at tech companies like Google, Twitter, etc. So, but we need to be mindful of the part that when during COVID, travel was contracting, these were the companies which were actually going on a hiring spree. So as you can see, in the last 4 years, tech space actually increased its headcount by 60%, while travel in general is down from pre-pandemic levels till now. So in some way, we still have that insulation, right? I mean, we have had those layoff lumps in the industry already, while tech and retail is now going through that cycle. So we are insulated that way. And although these numbers do look hint towards an economic slowdown, it doesn't necessarily mean that travel is, the sky is not falling down on travel. We still can be a little bit optimistic about the industry. Now, this is one of the most important charts that I would want to talk about today. So let me explain it a little bit. How do you read through? The dark blue lines is basically the GDP forecast, which IMF has given us. So basically, how would 2023 GDP look relative to 2019, and the light blue lines are basically the Skift Travel Health Index score. So that's a score that we internally derive to measure the strength of the industry, which is basically, we cover airlines, tourism, car rentals, everything is included in this score. So now if you look at Asia Pacific, GDP is at a 133, basically 33% more than 2019 in 2023, while the STHI score is sitting at 68, which basically means we are 32% lower than the pre-pandemic levels till now. So I mean, we have lost sight, and we were just so focused on recovering and getting back to 2019 levels that we've forgotten that the economy has already grown back to pre-pandemic levels, right? So there's a huge catch-up that needs to be done in the travel economy. And even in the recessionary phase, if we expect the GDP to come down, there'll still be a big lag. There'll still be a big, huge gap that travel needs to fill. Now, that was the one big point. The second big point is of reopening of Asia, right? So here are these are the top 10 airline routes by seat capacity, 2019 versus 2022. So the ones in green highlight the routes in Asia. So in 2019, as you can see, there were 9 out of 10 routes in Asia, while in 2022, there's only 1. So we believe that there was so much of travel activity happening in Asia in 2019, which needs to come back. And when it comes back, it will boost global travel. Now, Asia is reopening. The reopening is underway, but the progress is slow. So here we are presenting the international inbound airline seats, which basically gives you an insight of a broad interest in inbound travel. So we have London, New York, Tokyo, Shanghai, international inbound airline seats, which is basically representative of different stages of reopening of travel, right? So Japan opened last year fall, and it is already at summer New York levels this year. China is yet to return, as we have been reading these headlines about China reopening. And when it comes back, it will hopefully come back with a bang. It will mean a lot for the travel industry. Why do I say that? I mean, just look at these numbers. China was the largest exporter of tourism in the world in 2019. $255 billion in tourism expenditure. It's $100 billion bigger than the next exporter. So, I mean, China is going to be hugely important for the entire tourism industry to revive. But I've already talked about Asia's catch-up phase, which is US and Europe slowing down, but Asia picking up. Now, the big billion-dollar question is China coming back, right? So the question is, even if the zero-COVID policy in China is lifted, the question is, will the Chinese travelers go back to the same destinations? Maybe not, because the political game has entirely changed in the last 2 years. And it is very much possible that the Chinese actually do not travel to their usual destinations. So what we're saying is that Asia will be the powerhouse of growth in the coming year, but also it will entail redistribution of tourism. Because, I mean, who knows where will the Chinese travel, where will the Indians travel post-pandemic? And of course, I mean, we cannot cover this presentation without talking about this hugely important point that India's population is going to peak in the next 20 years, but China is already declining. So, I mean, in 2023 mid, it's expected that India's population is actually going to surpass China's, which will mean a lot for the travel industry. Now, why do I say that? So if we look at these population graphs, so as a demographer, how you would read it is what age category, I mean the percentage of people who's falling in which category is exactly what this chart shows. Now, if we look at China, we know that China is aging, right? So you'll see higher number of people in the older age brackets, while if you look at India, it's a different story altogether. I mean, the maximum number of people are actually falling in the working age category, which essentially means that there'll be more people contributing to the economic growth, right? And people contributing to the economic growth turns out that there'll be a higher amount of discretionary spend, which will directly impact travel. So we're expecting full recovery of outbound tourism from India in 2024, and it'll increase to around 29 million in 2025. We spoke to the Thailand Tourism Authority, and we already know that India is in progress to be the biggest source market for Thailand. So, I mean, in the last 3 years, since China has taken a back seat, India is actually gearing up to become one of the biggest source markets in Asia, and otherwise also. But there's a word of caution, of course. Here on this slide, I'm presenting the average expenditure per outbound trip. So if we compare, an average Chinese would spend $1,700 per outbound trip, while India is somewhere around $1,062. I mean, $1,700 is a big amount per outbound trip. So there's a huge hole in the travel economy which is missing, and we're expecting it to come back when China comes back. And the point is there is a huge catch-up with respect to number of travelers from India and also the expenditure. So, I mean, even if the number of Indians traveling increases by 10%, the amount they spend will still be 2/3 of what an average Chinese spends. So this is, again, like, I mean, a huge hole that needs to be filled. So it's not that easy. I mean, we have that demographic window. We have a lot of working age population that's increasing in India, but the big but is that we need to have that many jobs in the country. We need to have that kind of spending potential to become the next China. So, I mean, although only the demographic dividend grabs headlines and people say that India is going to become the next China with respect to outbound tourism, it's not that easy. There are a lot of issues at hand that needs to be handled, some basic socioeconomic issues. So, for example, the basic data here. Literacy rate in China is 93%, India is 66%. Internet penetration is half of what is China's. Skilled labor, India is still sitting at a 3%, while China is at 24%. So with respect to spending capacity, China's GDP is 5x, discretionary spend is 5x of India. And obviously, when we talk tourism, we need to talk basic infrastructure. So the international seat capacity to and from China is 2.5x of India. It's not even comparable. India is still missing a big transcontinental airline, and we need to have that kind of an infrastructure to support the outbound tourism growth. So these are sorry. These are some issues that need to be addressed for India to become that outbound tourism hub that we're expecting it to. Now, here is one big mega trend. I mean, here we are presenting GDP per capita on the x-axis and tourism expenditure on the y-axis. So what basically we are saying is, as the country becomes wealthier, as the economy becomes wealthier, they tend to spend more on travel, which is, of course, a universal trait. I mean, you get wealthier, the only way to present or represent your wealth is travel. So, and as per IMF, India and China both are going to dominate the economies in the next 30 years. And even if, I mean, when we reach that level, it's going to boost travel and it's going to change the face of outbound travel. And that is what we are trying to present through this graph. Now, let me just sort of summarize this entire redistributed theme, redistributed mega trend. So I've already spoken about how India is going to become the next China and it's going to reorder the outbound travel segment. Then there are a couple of, so I'm not going to talk about all of them because we are short on time, but there are a couple of points that I want to highlight. Now, when we talk about anywhere travelers. So for example, in US and Europe, there's another issue of wealthy travelers. Now, when you can travel anywhere, you don't want to just travel anywhere, right? So basically, there are 70% of Gen Z and millennials in US who want to travel to unique destinations now, I mean, the destinations no one has heard of, no one has experienced. So now that's another kind of issue, and that we believe is going to, again, reorder travel and redistribute the travel flows. Then there's another compounding issue of border bottlenecks. So for example, Indians applying for, I mean, I'm sure you guys are aware that the wait time for US visa for Indians is over 400 days at this point in time. And also for other countries like Mexico, etc. So, I mean, these travelers are not going to just sit for a year and say, okay, we're going to wait for the US visa to come. They'll travel to other places. They'll explore new destinations. So that's, again, another point which is going to, sort of force redistribution of traveler flows. And the last point that I want to sort of focus on is the climate impact. So, climate impact now is not anymore a marketing faff. It's actually shifting into the operational phase of itself. And people are actually wanting to spend on sustainable options. And now when people spend on these sustainable options, again, that is going to force redistribution traveler flows in the sense that there'll be different destinations that will become vogue, that will, come up. So yeah, I mean, that's how I want to wrap up and say that Asia is going to empower the growth of travel, but also redistribution of traveler flows. I'm going to hand it over to Pidin again, and she's going to talk more about the other mega trends.
Thank you, Varsha. And as you can see, Varsha has spoken about the redistributed part of it. Now, we've used blended to describe a handful of megatrends. So when we say that travel is becoming blended in 2023, what does that actually mean? It means that, if you were a hotel that required your guests to check in at the front office, you suddenly had to adopt something called contactless check-in, which was being done by short-term rentals. Now, if you were a short-term rental, you had to adopt a new revenue management system, which hotels had been doing for a long time. And as far as human capital is concerned, if you were working in the revenue department of a travel company, you suddenly found yourself also handling marketing. So you may have adopted strategies from retail or from entertainment sector to up your marketing game. So this blending, overlapping, de-siloing is known as the next phase of travel. So we've also talked, like I said, we've been talking about the great merging and about how blended travel is in and what we call bleisure. So Skift Research in 2022 worked along with Trip Actions to do a survey in which they found out that in 2019, 31% of people had a weekend along with their business trip. But in 2022, that figure went up to 38, which is a 7% point rise. So that means that people were mostly opting for a weekend. So they would have gone somewhere for work, but they would have wanted to stay longer and experience the place as well. And then there is the other mega trend that we've talked about, in which we are talking about how hotels are making emotion the new brand standard. Now, what do you mean by saying that emotion is the new brand standard? Chain hotels had been paying a lot of attention to the kind of furniture, trying to ensure that the furniture is uniform in all the properties, or maybe the thread count in the bed sheet should be of a certain quality. Now with the COVID, we've realized that, so this is a very American example, but this is something which is applicable for put it in any other continent and you'll understand that. So in 2013, people were spending 6.5 hours per week with their friends. In 2019, right before the pandemic, that went down to 4 hours per week. And in 2022, that's last year, it was 2 hours and 45 minutes per week. So what does that mean? That means that people are feeling lonely. Travelers are feeling lonely. So you as a hotel, what is it that you need to do, or as a destination management company, to make these people, if you have a certain way of dealing with them, emotions will click. And that is why hotels are now launching these new lifestyle brands to cater to these consumers. The other trend that we've talked about is about greater price transparency in short-term rentals. So initially when people loved Airbnb because they had this very homely feeling. But as soon as they felt that there were some hidden charges, they were feeling very click and baited. So Airbnb changed the way in which they were pricing themselves. Now, as far as pricing is concerned, we know that India is a very price-sensitive market. If you just look at a small example, Ease My Trip, I recently spoke to the co-founder of Ease My Trip, and they spoke about the fact that they've built an entire brand on the fact that they do not charge convenience fee. And they're trying to do that for other countries as well. They've launched in Dubai, they've launched in Thailand. So they have understood that the inconvenient truth about convenience charges. And the other thing is that, for 3 years we were sitting at home and we realized this beautiful thing called Zoom. We did not have to step out of our homes to attend an event or meet a person. So everything could be done over, you just had to change into your formal, maybe for the top half, and then sit in your Bermudas. But now, if you want to invite people to your event, what is it that you're going to do differently that is going to engage these people? So at the recent Skift Global Forum in Dubai in December, so I'm sure you will be able to guess it, but one of them is a hologram. So we had Chris Nassetta, who's the CEO of Hilton, join in, we beamed him through as a hologram. And, this was something that we as a media company were also very excited about. Everyone was looking forward to the Chris Nassetta event. And I'm sure Sridhar was there from Singapore Tourism Board at the event. And I'm sure he also had a nice time. So, of course, and the other thing that's most important, and especially in a market like India, is about the fact that tour operators have had to embrace software solutions, which had long been something that they had been avoiding for a really long time. I've got figures here to say that, some tour operators are spending almost about $1 million on technology. The global tour operator software market was estimated to be about 500 million in 2020, But in 2026, this market is projected to be around 1.2 billion, which means that if you don't, you might be lost in the race if you don't adapt to it. So from the blended theme, we've understood that there is a great merging in customer lives. And that is promoting leaders like you to think outside silos and think out of the box. And you can use these customer emotions as a lens to cater to tailor products and services and innovate for them. So blended travel is also is equal to blended business. Now, I know that we've overshot, so I'm just going to run past these themes. If you have any questions and if you want to interact with us, we are there at the event. We can always chat. So when we've talked about a polarized world, super luxury is something that Indians are big on. Super luxury has gone a step further. There are these people, we've realized that there are people who do not mind spending $1,300 for a spa experience or $80 pasta. So, they buy it with the same thing that we might buy a bottle of water. So super luxury is something that we have opened, it's opened a whole new world. So you, as a travel operator, as a tour operator, or as a travel management company, how do you cater to that? The other thing is that the changing face of human capital, Of course, we've seen the massive layoffs happening. So and you have seen that, be it the pilot shortage or the shortage of people in the hospitality sector, you've seen it's very difficult to get back people now that they've been laid off. It's very difficult to get them back to the travel industry. So how do we work to make travel industry an aspirational career choice? And how do we retain talent? And the most important of this is that how do we upskill talent and make them stay? We've seen many hospitality companies and many destinations trying to come up with academic courses and working to make sure that the people there remain there for a longer time. And of course, like I said, we've been talking about ChatGPT for a really long time. We just tried this with ChatGPT and we asked them, what is the future of tourism? So, this answer was typed out. Now, when we asked about what are the 10 marketing tips for Iceland, they decided to give us, look at the speed at which it's done. It'll take us some time to think and then, so this is something that ChatGPT has done for us. And we've seen that, the figures have come out today. It's one of the fastest growing. But, of course, there is a but to it as well. So how do we adapt to that? And how do we make sure that there is a great merging between AI and the human touch as well? So, and the last theme that I want to talk about is perm anxiety. Now, Skift had devised this term in 2017 in a very different time when people were, when we were talking about wars or when we were talking about some unforeseen events. But with COVID, perm anxiety has become a part of it. Now, recently when I was talking to Thailand Tourism, they said that India is on its way to becoming one of the biggest source markets for them after Malaysia. It was number 2. Today I talked to the TAT person, and he told me that India is now number 4. So I asked him what happened. That is because, we've changed the rules. We now want anybody coming in from Thailand to have a RT-PCR report. I was in Thailand for almost a month, and suddenly I heard that I need to get an RT-PCR report. And that creates a kind of, an issue for people. And they're seeing that people would rather wait and travel than, make travel plans. So this is something that we need to be aware of and we need to adapt to. And how we do that is, of course, you guys are the ones who are going to decide that and perhaps make it one of the most creative years in travel. Thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for staying on. I know it was long, but thank you very much. And if you need to talk to us, we are available. Let's have a chat. Thank you very much, and thank you, OTM, for this wonderful opportunity. We really enjoyed ourselves here, And it was great partnering with OTM for this. Thank you.